Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SuperStudio first design talk. Have with me here Hudson Smith, who is also responsible for the creative formulation of the brief, and he's going to introduce the speakers we've got tonight. So we've got Kenny Ash from Ash Sakula in London, and we've also going to have Peter Bezley and Jess Espresso, two architects from Brisbane, talking in a bit. So I guess to start off with, just a few things to go over. This is really just intended to be a sort of informal kind of chat with some speakers that we believe embody the themes of what we're trying to get out of the participants by doing this design competition. And we think it's a really good opportunity, kind of once they finish their presentations, to just have a sort of open conversation, whether it's through the chat or just turning your camera on and kind of starting that conversation about maybe it's your proposal or some themes that you're thinking of proposing to respond to the brief and things like that. And also just a quick reminder that those who haven't registered for SuperStudio, you do actually have until 7:30 tonight, Australian Eastern Standard Time, if you would still like to participate after hearing some of the talks. And I think Maddie is also about to link the brief again for anyone who hasn't seen it or missed the reading of the brief session yesterday. But no, without further ado, thanks so much for joining us. Apologies for the delayed start, and I'm going to pass it over to Hudson to continue.
Thanks, Kieran. Yeah, welcome everyone. It's really nice to see the numbers kind of rolling in. So yeah, tonight first we're starting off with Kenny Ash, and thank you so much, Kenny, for agreeing to talk, especially on such short notice. I think if anything right now, it's interesting to reflect with what's been going on with the pandemic and kind of this beauty of the reduced scale almost, of being able to easily enable people like yourself to present, especially for an Australian audience. So for those of you who do not know Kenny, Kenny founded Ash Sakula Architects with Robert Sakula in 1994. She studied at the University of Cambridge and the University of Westminster, if I'm correct. Ash Sakula is a culturally rooted urban developed practice. They've worked with communities, art organisations, enlightened developers and public bodies. She's lived and worked as an architect and urban activist in London, Berlin and New York, where she helped pioneer the world's first farmers market. Ash runs traditionally the Adaptable Neighbourhoods, that is a strand of Ash Sakula that researches the ingredients of great neighbourhoods. These projects are often self-initiated, and they investigate the opportunities to base development strategies on existing local networks. Tonight, Kenny will be discussing kind of broadly from memory 2 projects, one about a contested public space in and around the King's Dock in the London Museum of Slavery, and another contested space that has been occurring in COVID. But yeah, I think before Kenny starts, we're very, very fortunate to have someone of this caliber speaking in front of us tonight, and I think it's really important ultimately to ask the questions and think a lot about what's being presented and beyond just the project, and more so the way of thinking that it will exhibit. But yeah, Kenny, thank you again, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you. Well, I'm really looking forward to your questions, really, because this is an opportunity for me to hear what you guys who've got sort of similar but very different problems to the ones we're facing here, how you're going to be approaching that. It feels like difficult not to have some kind of like gleefulness or schadenfreude at the moment at the fact that the whole property industry has been upturned and the tables really aren't going to be put back together very quickly. So this is a magic moment, I think, for creating the new, not normals, but a variety of normals. And I thought on this invitation that I would try and just show you some stories of things that we have been looking at through animation. No, I don't want to go to that. Do I want to go here? Am I sharing my screen? Not yet.
No, not yet.
No, okay. So I need to get back here and share my screen. Bottom here. I'll just press that button. Great, share. That's working, that's good. So the first story that I wanted to tell you about is something of a charrette, a bit like the one that you're doing now. There was an afternoon to look at a little bit of London where they have the largest, in fact, the largest in the UK, largest exhibition centre. So this is just by the docks, the old docks in London, and it's a place where they do the big arms fairs or the big catering equipment fairs or all sorts of things. And there's this kind of like big severance between this area by the docks, which is a kind of corporate landscape, and the big area of housing behind, which is where all the dock workers used to come from. And it's one of the more deprived areas in the whole country. And so you have this like incredible contrast between massive wealth pouring into the exhibition centre and conference centre. Every 3 days, millions of pounds seem to be spent, and then it's all ripped out and goes into skips, and then the next thing comes. But the other side of the tracks, none of this money is trickling through. So we made this 1-minute film, which was looking at how instead of steps up to this big exhibition centre, we could make more of a kind of just a slopey landscape, which could engage people more with the docks. And at the same time, instead of having like this steep staircase as you go over the railway tracks back into the poor neighbourhood, you'd mould the neighbourhood as a landing point with a sloped terrain, and that the architecture would respond to that. And that isn't too frivolous, because they actually are going to be rebuilding that part of the neighbourhood. It's a place for densification and regeneration. So I'm going to show you this this film now. I'm really hoping all the sound and everything will work, and that you can see it. But let me know if that's not going to happen. Right, maybe because the Zoom we're hiding this thing.
Whoa, amazing.
Just by City Airport as well. So. So one of the nice things with that situation was there was a local organisation that we could connect with called the Peach, like the fruit, the People's Empowerment Association for Custom House, and Custom House is the name of that neighbourhood. Now, when you come out of Excel, the big kind of conference centre, there feels to be nothing, no little moment. There's a very nasty modern pub which is usually overflowing with all the different operatives, and there's nowhere to sort of stop and carry on your business discussion. So it's a really big offer to the corporate operation of Excel, as well as being one to the neighborhood. It's a really symbiotic thing where you could imagine very easily small bars and businesses and playful kinds of businesses building up there on the just with the crumbs of the wealth that would come across the tracks there. So the next thing I was going to, as another provocation, I was going to talk to you about, I need to escape from that, escape. I was going to talk to you about a very different self-initiated project. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, no, we've got you loud and
okay. So the well, the trouble is I've got. So the issue with
in Nottingham Waterside.
Okay, I've just got to stop this. Sorry. This was a situation where the biggest quango in the UK, which is the Homes and Communities Agency, had decided to sell this plot of land, and decided that they had to knock down 2 concrete warehouses before it was suitably, attractive to developers. And we heard about this. We knew this stretch of river. We liked these concrete warehouses, and so we made a little film which tried to show the future potential of reuse with these concrete structures. And that's what I'm going to play you now. Is that okay?
yeah.
In Nottingham Waterside, right on the River Trent, 10 minutes from the city centre, there are 2 valuable buildings that some people want to knock down. Born in 1928, the old Waterways buildings are proud survivors from Nottingham's industrial past. Good buildings with strong frames that embrace a beautiful corner site. It would just be wasteful to get rid of them. They can get a new coat and be reused. The cathedral-like ground floors could be opened up with a path directly through them, becoming an integral part of the Riverside Walk and bringing cyclists, wanderers and walkers into the restaurants and cafes that wrap around the giant columns. The lower floors are large, highly flexible workspaces. They're serviced to allow compartments to come and go and occupied by creative startups and restartups fed by recent graduates and ambitious people from Nottingham. Because of the full spectrum of flats available in the building, it becomes an internal marketplace for upsizing and downsizing, where whether your kids are at home or at uni, you can be in a flat that is the right size and shape. Inside is a supportive environment, where large windows turn the corridor into a shared space for looking in and out of kitchens and living rooms and posting notes to remind each other, Kate, don't forget you're on tomorrow for the walking school bus, and remember brunch on the roof this Sunday, all invited. On the roof are summer houses and platforms for picnics looking out over the river. There are solar panels, tough vegetable patches, sedum and planters growing seasonal flowers that filter the building's water. A new civic space becomes a major attraction on the river. Houses on the square mean that there are eyes on the street at all times. Events take place all through the year. A farmer's market brings fresh produce from around Nottinghamshire once a week, and a new pontoon becomes a hive for riverboat retail. On summer nights, movies are projected as people sit in the square having picnics. This all acts as the focal point for new development as terrace roads lead people to the site down winding paths. If we push beyond skin-deep thinking, we'll often find that the key to regeneration is continuity, being custodians of our past, because sometimes it's the very thing you think is in the way that's the best starting point.
So that was now like 10 years ago, but I think that a lot of that kind of thoughtless demolition is still taking place, just because in design communities and maybe some retail communities, people think that, concrete is cool. It doesn't mean that we're not still like throwing out loads of embodied energy and potential, and the kind of potential which is sometimes a bit of a compost heap that other things can grow in much more quickly than if we do the scorched earth policy. So another kind of project, which was actually with the university, with Sheffield University is I'm going to show you a film which became part of a website, and the website was trying to connect people to the all of the different pilot projects that have taken place in building your own home, not as an individual, but collectively with people, so that you co-invest and you maybe make a project for 30 families to live in. And this kind of thing happens quite a bit in Berlin and Vienna and maybe in Australia, but not really in the UK. So this was again a piece of propaganda for that kind of use of public land, because again in the UK there is a lot of respect for the house builders because they're big and because they're kind of like, they look like business, but not so much for local energy or really leveling the playing field for smaller builders. So this I'd like to show you now.
In the UK, our housing needs are not.
I think it's not sharing at the moment.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're right. Sorry.
So did I not share the screen?
No, it wasn't sharing.
Was the last one sharing?
No, sorry. I was under the impression that it was an audio.
Oh my God. Okay, so I better play the last one again. Is that okay?
That would be absolutely great. Thank you so much.
Okay, sorry guys. I just must have pressed the wrong button. Okay, you are on screen sharing, but how do I get back to Nottingham Waterside? Right. I'm going to go back to my crib sheet here, and right. Okay, take two. Can you see the screen now?
Yeah, we can see it now.
I'm really sorry.
No. I'm sorry. Yeah.
In Nottingham Waterside, right on the River Trent, 10 minutes from the city centre, there are two valuable buildings that some people want to knock down. Born in 1928, the old Waterways buildings are proud survivors from Nottingham's industrial past. Good buildings with strong frames that embrace a beautiful corner site. It would just be wasteful to get rid of them. They can get a new coat and be reused. The cathedral-like ground floors could be opened up with a path directly through them, becoming an integral part of the Riverside Walk and bringing cyclists, wanderers and walkers into the restaurants and cafes that wrap around the giant columns. The lower floors are large, highly flexible workspaces. They're serviced to allow compartments to come and go and occupied by creative startups and re-startups fed by recent graduates and ambitious people from Nottingham. Because of the full spectrum of flats available in the building, it becomes an internal marketplace for upsizing and downsizing, where whether your kids are at home or at uni, you can be in a flat that is the right size and shape. Inside is a supportive environment, where large windows turn the corridor into a shared space for looking in and out of kitchens and living rooms and posting notes to remind each other, Kate, don't forget you're on tomorrow for the walking school bus, and remember brunch on the roof this Sunday, all invited. On the roof are summer houses and platforms for picnics looking out over the river. There are solar panels, tough vegetable patches, sedum and planters growing seasonal flowers that filter the building's water. The new civic space becomes a major attraction on the river. Houses on the square mean that there are eyes on the street at all times. Events take place all through the year. A farmer's market brings fresh produce from around Nottinghamshire once a week, and a new pontoon becomes a hive for riverboat retail. On summer nights, movies are projected as people sit in the square having picnics. This all acts as the focal point for new development as terrace roads lead people to the site down winding paths. If we push beyond skin-deep thinking, we'll often find that the key to regeneration is continuity, being custodians of our past, because sometimes it's the very thing you think is in the way that's the best starting point.
Yeah,
Okay.
Made a lot more sense.
I'm glad that you caught that, because
Yes.
it must have made no sense at all before. Right. So I'm just going to start this one again. This is about co-investing and taking public land for a reasonable price, but just been respected as groups of local investors rather than things only being really packaged up and land acquisition for the people.
In the UK, our housing needs are being met.
She's talking about some other. I now can't fucking hear it.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Sorry. Something's
It's been
gone
on
funny.
since like, well, it started about 15 minutes ago. They were late. But now I can't hear it.
It's so annoying.
Is that your end, do you think?
Just a reminder
You
to
got
everyone on
the-
the call to
'cause
mute
I
their
had
mics,
to-
please.
Sorry?
No, I think someone was discussing in the background.
Oh, maybe their mic wasn't off, just something
Yeah,
like
no, I
that.
think they must have entered in their mic as well. But no,
Oh,
right now.
okay. So then we can do it.
In the UK, our housing needs are not being met. It's a big political issue. We are not building enough homes. Over the last 20 years, the UK has increasingly come to depend on a small number of large volume house builders, a well-structured industry. When the market is booming, it delivers housing in large chunks. Why? Now, more people are getting together and thinking about what they actually need rather than what the house builders want to give them, focusing on the livability of a home instead of the short-term appeal of a market product. Because building your own place doesn't have to be something only the well-off can consider. The National Planning Policy Framework places a duty on local authorities to measure and provide for the demand of those that wish to build their own homes. A pilot custom-build revolving loan fund via the government's Homes and Communities Agency provides access to short-term development finance for multi-unit custom-build schemes. Innovation is sweeping across the housing sector, with collective custom build as a central strand. Groups with shared needs and interests can coalesce through crowd and cloud technology, unlocking powerful new ways to channel energy and finance projects that have never existed before. Off-site manufacture of houses gives a greater consistency in build quality and performance, and quicker build times, further reducing risk for self-builders and their partners, pump priming a local knowledge base of skills and post-industrial development. In other countries, it is quite usual to be more involved in the design and build of your own home, and it is becoming more so here. The number of self-built homes in the UK already matches the output of any of our biggest house builders. With collective custom build, individual self-builders combine to take advantage of the opportunities that come from working together. Homes built collectively benefit from economies and shared access to supply chains, and build future neighbourhoods based on mutual support and the sharing of risk. Such interconnected neighbourhoods deliver benefits in health, education, and social cohesion. Collective custom build groups are enabled by partnership between local authorities, registered providers, developers, house builders, or other third sector organisations, and the local support so needed to secure planning permissions. With sales guaranteed up front, collective custom build can act as a financial catalyst, a pre-financed starter phase for more traditional housing projects, a productive seedbed. Collective custom build can unlock home building opportunities on challenging sites, the kind of sites only too familiar to many local authorities and their developer partners. Self-builders are free to think more imaginatively about, say, a large edge-of-town greenfield site, typically anonymous and badly connected, looking for an identity and sense of place. A collective custom build development reaches out to surrounding neighbours and builds a new, distinct community, harnessing the potential of shared space. On smaller dispersed sites, such as urban brownfield land or the industrial fringes of rural areas, collective custom builders enjoy the opportunity to build dense developments of unconventionally shaped homes, cheek by jowl with existing buildings and infrastructure, creating an intriguing new quarter in the city. Or through re-inhabiting an existing building. There are custom builders searching for a genuine historical connection and sense of place, and the cracking of an otherwise doomed piece of heritage. More and more people are getting together and making things happen on the ground, and central government seems to be listening. Collective custom build, an idea whose time has come.
So I'm not going to stop sharing. I'm going to try. I'm going to now just escape. And yeah, so this actually hasn't taken off as quickly as everybody assumed. Maybe this was 8 years ago. And I think that this was a piece of propaganda that we did, if you like, for local authorities. We took it round the conferences that local authorities go to try and persuade the officers in local government that custom build, collective custom build, self-build were quite normal ways to go about housing people, and not some kind of fad or newfangled thing. And I did promise Hudson that I was going to share a recent project that we started in March, sometime before the George Floyd murder, with a group that are based in London by the Royal Docks on the other side of the river from the first one I showed you. And the interesting thing, I'm not going to unshare screen now, I'm just going to go straight into this.
Listen to this. Have you ever heard of the concept of a museum without walls? It's a place with no boundaries, a place where people can travel and roam and be free. So why not have a museum without walls in and around this very place, the historic dockyards of Deptford? Anyone looking into the history of the dockyard will find a super dark chapter that many of us would like to skirt over. I'm talking about how slavery began in Deptford, how it impacted on us and the rest of the world. These stories are becoming more and more relevant. To start to understand who we all are, we need to dig down into a community of people and together create a space, a place where technology meets the natural environment, where history meets geography and education is alive through a walking, talking museum. Imagine if people in Deptford with ancestors directly connected to the history of the slave trade, maybe poets, musicians, teachers, VJs, DJs, artists, parents, mechanics, elders, singers, techies, hairdressers, local historians, and teenagers with a passion became this museum. So now, if you want to explore the social cost of slavery, the real history, not just like royal battles and imperial glory, pick up your phone, scroll down to book your guide, who will appear in person, and take you on an adventure exploring Deptford through their voice and the new eye they will give you for this windy, magical place.
So we're actually in the middle of working with these people. Sorry about the screen at the moment. I think I won't mess around though. Because they came to us and said, could you do a feasibility study so we can maybe think about trying to submit a lottery fund, heritage lottery fund application to try and get some money so that we can then develop the project further, so that then we can maybe submit for various funding, pots and put up a building, because the Deptford is quite a special place where all the convoy ships were built. It was the King's Dockyard, which didn't actually, most of those ships didn't actually carry slaves, but they protected the slavers. It was all part of the system. And we had some meetings with them, and we're quite involved in Ashsacular in the idea of the interim project in the city, rather than always, chasing permanence, because we see the city as a place of churn. And we showed them the project that we'd done on the other side of the river, which was actually a 5-year occupation of a piece of land, which we called the Caravanserai, which is still a charity that where we support various interim projects. So we said, well, why don't you just decide that the museum is going to open next March, in a year's time. And given that time frame, then you can start looking at what are the resources that you actually have yourselves, because there were 6 people in this group called Museum of Slavery and Freedom, but they're connected to Deptford Action, lots of different other organizations, and also a local resource center with fantastic local history library run by volunteers. So we said, well, maybe this is it. You know, you have everything you need to make this museum happen. And we set up museum meetings with people in Google about setting up ahead of time a 5G network there. So anyway, I'm just going to play you the second film, which just describes a bit more about this. Although we're in the middle of this project, these are just we're trying to get down to a 2-minute film, which will embody this project and be easy to share on social media and just in the pub. But sometimes when you want to make a very short piece of propaganda or a short film, it's a lot more work than making a rambly thing. So I think we've got probably another 3 or 4 weeks on this project. But I'll play you the second snippet now.
Deptford Dockyard was established by none other than Henry VIII 500 years ago. It was the first royal dockyard and the most significant of the Tudor period. What we all know to be Convoy's Wharf was then called King's Yard. King Henry himself would come here and watch the Royal Navy vessels being built. For the next 300 years, this dockyard remained one of the principal naval yards in the country, as well as becoming a major shipping dockyard. But as we look back through the history of this ambitious, powerful, momentous place, a dark tale unfolds. In this very dockyard lived the English father of the slave trade. His name, John Hawkins. He is thought to be the first to profit from the notorious triangular trading system. After his barbaric voyages transporting African slaves across the sea, he and many others brought sugar, rum, cotton, tobacco back to Deptford shores. We learn in school that Britain led the way in abolition. What isn't often taught is that the slave trade generated the wealth that created the Industrial Revolution in England and lined the pockets of the aristocracy and the City of London. Look around and you will see building after building produced by the money made from abducting Africans and their commodities.
Assalamu alaikum. Gina Languin in UAC. I'd like to talk to you about the African slave trade across the Sahara Desert, across the Indian Ocean, and began with the Muslims, Arab and the Swahili traders won control of the Swahili coast in the 9th century.
I remember the first time I went to the House of Slave in Senegal. It was so moving to see how the way people were treated. They were captured and they were kept in this dark, narrow, dirty dungeon.
Walking towards Southwark from the Royal Dockyards along the Thames, you will see a road named the South Sea Company. It was set up to supply African slaves to the islands in the South Seas and the Americas. Thank you so much for listening and coming to my tour, and I hope you've learned something today.
Hello, I'm back. Are you all still here?
Yes. No, we are.
Yeah, great. So it would be really interesting to hear about the projects that people are thinking about doing now in this SuperStudio, and then sort of see what threads can be drawn between any of our experiences and what you're thinking about now. Are there any questions?
That sounds like a really good idea. I'm not sure how we will go about asking questions, whether people want to write them in the box or just, turn on your mic. And
it's nice when people say them, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think sometimes they get a bit gun shy.
Nah.
Yeah,
couldn't be possible. It's so informal. I would just sit here and wait and see if any of the 44 participants want to say like something. Yeah.
I enjoy an awkward silence.
My mum's a Quaker.
Hello, Kenny. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can. Yeah.
Hello, it's Susan.
Hello, Susan.
Hi. Yeah. I want to ask you a question about the Nottingham Waterside, the project, the two concrete structures you were talking about. So, in the video, I said like there were some developments proposed for the inside of the concrete structures. Then, what about the outside of the? What about the like the outside look of that structure? Like how are you going to like change like how the whole thing looks, or are you going to just keep as they are, like those like are you going to keep the industrial look of the structure? And like what do you think about like the interior function and the like the relationship between the interior function and the look of the like the outside look of the building?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that it would be very valuable to be able to keep the concrete on the inside and to create a new skin on the outside, because what we want to do is use the concrete as the mass of the concrete to keep the diurnal temperatures steady and to absorb heat rather than losing it all the time. But on the outside, although it would be cool to keep a kind of concrete structure look, what we probably would need to do is get some sort of diamond cutters, cut all the windows into the poured concrete structure. And then we would use various layers that would, throw off the rain, a kind of rain screen cladding, but one that was gave a mass to the building, kept it feeling heavy. So I think that we never got that far. They knocked down those structures, and it was, I guess, a failed piece of propaganda for that reason. But, these, if you have to dig up all the foundations from something like that, then you have to find a place to put that material in landfill. And then you have to recreate some kind of structure there to hold up the floors of a new apartment block. That is about the most wasteful thing you can think of. I mean, really.
Yeah, I see. So, like, ultimately, you wanted to like transform how the building looks from the outside.
Well, it would be transformed because you'd have all those windows into the apartments. And you'd have what's quite nice about the orientation of those buildings is that they're very open to the south. So you could maybe have passively heated ground floors because they just get a lot of sun. And if you can trap that within that double height glass facade, then that would be a nice place for cyclists to stop off for a coffee. That was the idea. I mean, really, it's funny because, like, when you're an architect, you always would go into the detail. So, like, when you're doing the cartoon, you're always thinking about, I wonder where that membrane is going and how we'd deal with the insulation here and there. But that's just because we're trained as architects, and it gives you an ability to zoom into the practicality of a reuse project and zoom back out to what's the potential character that you're putting in that neighborhood when you're punching windows into a mass like that. So you're right, it's about the aesthetics of what you're inventing there, as well as the practical curation of old structures.
Yeah, I see. Thank you.
Does that answer that?
Yeah.
Maybe
The reason
it's going to be like a white rendered ice cubey building, or maybe it could be covered with old bits of scrap and secondhand brickwork. I don't know.
Yeah. Like the reason I ask you this question is because I'm currently a bit struggling about like to make the decision about the form of the thing I create. Like I'm not sure like how will it I have some idea about like how it will look from the inside, but like I'm not sure about how it will look from the outside, and then what is the relationship between the inside and the outside. That's the thing like I'm trying to figure out now. That's why I'm asking you this question. And then I think it's quite helpful, like you are saying, like when like you punch windows, like that's what the inside needs, and then it will transform the look from the outside, and then the inside function sort of like will decide the look from the outside, the exterior look of the structure of the thing.
I think windows are very interesting because they are the eyes of a building, and they're the eyes of the neighborhood, really. So we see a lot of projects now that have tilt and turn windows for opening, and that to us is a really sad. It feels as if you're locking the inside in, and that you won't have people opening casements and leaning out and talking to somebody in the street, because they're behind this kind of pivoted window, which is often on a restrictor, so it can't even open properly. So we never do anything that doesn't have a casement window that you can open in its entirety, because that way you can get that connection between the inside and outside. And in the summer, it just looks really lively when all the windows are open. You see that as part of the perspective on the street.
Yeah. I think it gives like the building a human touch.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you, Susan. Does anyone else have any questions?
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Hey, my name is George, and I'm from Darwin. Question is, because I'm so interested in the topic that you're talking about in creating community. The question is, because we're in a pandemic at the moment, how will the pandemic challenge you, or how the pandemic transform like an urban space?
Can I just ask something? Sorry, Jules. Can you turn on your video?
Oh yeah, sure.
Thank you. It's just so much nicer. Hello.
Hello. So yeah, how does it challenge you in terms of, like with the pandemic? Because it's very challenging at the moment in terms of connecting people. So we are very limited. So how it challenged you?
Well, I think that the thing that's most weird and scary about it is that there is no time frame, is there? Like, this could be for the rest of our lives, or it could be, we could be seeing the back of it in a year. So I think it's helpful, seeing the positive side of this. It's helpful in that it puts public space in a new light, in that it's safer to do things outdoors than indoors, which means that there's more mixity, possibly between groups, and it means that there's more creative set of overlapping uses which can start defining public space. As I was just saying before, we're very interested in self-build, but also in temporary projects, so what they call meanwhile projects. And this is like the biggest experiment the world's ever known in meanwhile. What can we do which is more light-hearted and possibly creative than the permanent architectural, urbanistic things that we've been trained to look at? Because those all depend on other people agreeing who have access to planning and funding and things, whilst I think that this could be a way in which globalism means that we're all comparing, contrasting and sharing ways of using space differently. And we already got that a little bit with the Occupy movements, years ago. But we're now in a situation where, say, the West End of London, which people thought was the heart of our cultural identity, is it's probably closed for it might close for good, because the way that these things work, it's very difficult to pick them up after the such a huge shock to the system, and people are just not going to be that comfortable, I think, in sitting in incredibly crowded Victorian theatres, shoulder to shoulder with people, because you really people are getting used now to the idea that you have screens to your cashiers, and people's breath is threatening. So outdoors seems to be the place that we can there's enough happy molecules and wind and things to keep us feeling safe, but together. I don't know, what do you think? What's your project going to be about? Yes.
I haven't thought about it because I just get back from mini holidays. So I went out the Darwin for 2 days, and then I just get back last night, and just reading about the article, and because it's all about renew, and I was thinking about it. Maybe it talks about more about the pandemic and how are we going to respond, because it's really challenging nowadays on having a community, like having a gathering. You don't know who you're talking to, and are you in a safe place? Because
well, maybe that's why we thought with the MOSAF project, the museum project, that outdoors was the safe place, but digitally enabled, so that you could connect to the archive, the pictorial archive, and to voices through your phone. And a phone can be a whole world if you hold it close enough, but also to the human voice and to the collectivity of people around you. Seemed like that was an exciting moment to break through that British reluctance to really hang outdoors much. That's why we put rain in one of those shots, because okay, it's raining, so what? We're not going to dissolve. You can hold up your umbrella, you can wear sort of rainproof gear, but weather's fun, and we should just get over this idea that it has to be a Mediterranean climate before we can have a convivial community life. Good luck with it.
Thank you.
Katie, I think I'm going to quickly ask a question. I found it extremely interesting, particularly for the brief that each participant has been given. Your medium that you use in conveying kind of what you referred to as almost a propaganda. I find it extremely interesting on many reasons, but particularly because I feel as though your audience isn't the 2% that is commonly kind of, I guess, conceived as being the people that architects work for. And I think that's obvious within your work. But I guess because you aren't looking for this 2%, and you're looking at kind of intervening and yourself initiating a lot of your work, how would you, with kind of these key locations that each participant has the ability to look at, how would you say they should look at the places, and more importantly at the people, in order to potentially create something sustainable in terms of its impact on these places? You mentioned certain ideas about temporal structures. And I think their place within kind of the context of this brief is extremely interesting and relevant. But
well, I mean, I think it's really useful if you can make personal connections, even just to one or two people in those places, and usually there is a way. But the other thing is, there's luckily you can spy on people in the middle of the night, you know, through community forums and newspapers and commentary, and that's what we're doing at the moment. We're preparing for a pitch. We're one of three to do a big piece of strategy work for a coastal town called Ramsgate in Kent, and they've got a lot of Georgian heritage and then Victorian and Edwardian stuff, and also a madman who invented a kind of artificial stone and built a lot of quite creative, looks a bit like Hollywood sets there, stone structures coming down off the top of the cliffs to the beach and things. So we went there on Friday, and okay, it's nice to be able to go, but it was an incredible experience because it's happened before in different places to us. I mean, I could share lots more stories of times where we've made up a cartoon and then we've gone to a place and we've actually found real people who map almost precisely onto that imaginative population that we've not completely invented because we've been listening in, but we landed at this incredible glass house in Ramsgate, and almost immediately met the couple that ran this tea house in it, and they were saying, "Oh no, of course you can launch your project here, and we're really excited about that kind of getting people involved in heritage." Because the project is about how do you protect heritage long term, because you can't just keep it a rarefied discipline. You have to get a big section of the population excited about old structures and the potential of using them different ways. So they have to replace they're these incredibly tiny panes. It's a really it's an 18th century glass house. And they, every year, about 60 of these panes are broken by kids who come and throw stones at them, or blackbirds who see the grapes inside and want to get in, and da-da-da-da. And she said, but we never have to pay for it. There's this old guy who comes and carves this kind of, it's like a petal-shaped piece of glass, to replace the missing panes. He just comes regularly and does it. And the reason that he does it is because when he was a kid, he used to throw stones at that glass house, and he's doing his kind of penance for that kind of wildness. And it's that circularity that is very exciting to build into a place of trauma as well. You know, find the personal stories within somebody's lifetime that can make sense of it.
Yeah, that's
is that answer?
Story. Yeah. I think that's really, really interesting. Especially, it's quite obvious that you don't just look into the people that you're potentially going to work with or work for. You begin to know them and know their stories. That's really, really liberating. It really is. Anyone else for a question?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. So I have a question. Is it a must to do an architecture? Like, I look at the brief. Is art okay?
In relation to. Well, look, I think.
Tell us about, sorry to interrupt, Hudson, tell us about your art, because there's like huge overlapping, spaces of exploration there. What kind of art would can you turn your video on?
Sorry, I have bad connection here.
Oh, okay.
It's about
just
Black
tell us
Lives
about-
Matter.
It's about what?
Black Lives Matter.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, that sounds important. And what kind of art would you be doing there?
I'm just thinking about like I have an idea, but it's just still in the process of developing. So like I'm not sure yet, but I've been talking to my group members, but we're still deciding, should we go for an art approach or an architectural approach?
Cool.
Yeah, no, that's.
I mean, you still haven't told me anything of what your. I mean, art and architecture is the same stuff, really. Well, yeah, like, are you thinking about projecting something to get the message across for Black Lives Matter, or are you thinking about a communal singing event, or are you thinking about a kind of participatory artwork where people are putting it together in big groups, or what's your first thoughts?
Like we was kind of like invent something and then to put it together. Like we're still developing, so like yeah. But my question, like just to clarify, so like we know where we're heading. Like because like we have been debating, should we go for art or like architecture? But when I look at the brief over and over again, like it said it doesn't have like the architecture word in it, but instead there are so many ways to present it.
I think you should just get the blinkers off and not worry about architecture as a separate, sluice gate affair, really.
Right.
And so Munjal, you just came on my screen. Are you going to ask a question? I can't hear you. I think your microphone's off. I'm sorry, I still can't hear.
Maybe type if you can, Munjal, and I'll be able to read it out, or can you be able to read it? Jocelyn, I think before with what you were talking about, as long as there's strong intention, I think, whatever you and your group are looking at doing, just do it and do it well. The brief is intentionally ambiguous, I think, and it's for that reason. Yeah.
So it's like the next session that you've got lined up is going to be really exciting about materiality and new ways of exploring that. So that is also art and architecture. You couldn't say that it was just architecture.
I think that's very true. Very true.
Okay. Is anyone?
In the meantime, is anyone else wanting to ask a question while Munjal is talking?
There's somebody called Karama who said that they want to ask a question through the chat box. Yeah, you definitely should. And I think the answer to Steph as well, yes, I'll definitely put these links now on the chat box. Oh, right. We're looking to experiment with sound and textures in design. Can we have walkthrough as final deliverables? Does sound like that's possible.
Yeah, I can't see why not. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think there's a really strong element with your work and how you have been presenting it lately through those animations. That is something that is extremely strong. And it isn't, like you were saying, you obviously as an architect you're interested in what is within the walls, but the purpose of the bigger thinking was, not to be conveying that at that stage. Denise?
Okay.
Hello. Hi there.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. I actually have a question in relation to the brief. With the brief, like having the brief mentioning the workplace a lot of times, do we actually need to find a specific site for like where we're designing, or it can be just like purely with the notion of place? It can be at home, or like where, as in like the sense of location where we're designing.
And I think the beauty of having a place is something that you said that, you know, one, it generates that specificity. But who's to say that your room is not your place?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Who's to say, sorry, that your room is not your place? Yeah, so in regard to your question, I think that it is important to have a place in mind, because it will enable kind of you to delve into a degree of specificity with your kind of project and how you develop it. But in keeping with the links that have been provided to the brief, I think if you have strong intentions behind what you're wanting to do and what you're wanting to seek, that reflects the aspects of the brief and kind of the criteria, then no, I don't think that those locations are so concrete. Obviously, you know, you will have different.
Can I just say, Hudson, that we were recently working on a project called the Work Home Project, and you can get to that through a website, the workhomeproject.org. And it's looking at the fact that we are all, you know, most of us are working around a kitchen table, and that kitchen table is many different environments. You know, there are people who are doing speech therapy, there's people who are kind of doing eBay businesses, there's people who are mending clocks or making wedding cakes or creating, you know, bicycle workshops in their front room. So we're all having to use the home space in very creative ways. So I think if you're exploring that, that's really interesting for this project, because it's a place, it's a contested space. It's a place of kind of, if you like, trauma, you know, depending on how much friction is in your family. So I think, yeah, sounds like a really interesting time to do that.
Because I was a bit like confused when we moved into the method section of the brief, where the examples and photos that are given were like the New York, the what's the name of the island? Like there's a burial and like about the Black Lives Matter and all that. So that got me confused if like we have to actually choose a specific site. Like is it gonna be addressed in the US or in Italy or like where we're from as well, or it can
no, it's where you find. As I read it, SuperStudio is about where you find that.
Yeah.
All right, so that's flexible then.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
So, Kelton, did you just pop up to ask something? Hi. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's great. Okay. Thanks.
Woo! Too much things connected to the one computer. Yeah, sorry. So just looking back at your work, I think in the few projects that you've shown us, it was a lot about kind of like fostering community and people kind of wanting to engage in the space that they are in all the time. With our brief, we're kind of looking at kind of, you know, either events of trauma or grief, things that are charged with a lot of strong like grief, sadness, anger even, how would you go about kind of also catering to like privacy needs, or, you know, those moments where people kind of want to pull away from everything, like your project with the, you know, that kind of all the layers and the open homes and people always, you know, connecting. How I guess would you address the kind of wanting to, yeah, like step back, but to still have that community around them?
I mean, as I understand the SuperStudio, this is the moment to go out and not to worry about the privacy and the GDPR issues, or those perfectly sensible checks and balances. I think maybe this is a moment of freedom where you could sidestep those concerns and go for the guttural, like go for what matters. If you decide that means that you know, people need to be protected from too much, you know, emotion, rage, bureaucracy, or whatever, then that becomes core to your project. That's a different thing. But I feel like, say in the corridor of that apartment block, the idea of having glass into a kitchen space does sound like quite wild. You'd need to use fireglass. You'd need to have a kind of blind you could pull down on the inside. But the potential of that connectivity is so valuable that it's worth the extra cost of the fireglass and the blind, in my opinion. So that's exciting.
Yes, no, thank you. If anyone has any other questions, otherwise might make this the last question for Kenny, and then we'll move on to the next presenters. We could get one more in.
There is somebody in the chat who's just asked about the festival in Japan. Do I analyze the festival in its spatial quality, or do I try to recreate and design a similar atmosphere? Well, I mean, I think that the opportunity, given that you're remote and that this is a short project, is to do justice to that festival, all of the archive of that festival, and create an online simulacrum of the festival, capturing some of its like particularity, and then invite people from that community in Japan to add to your provocation, if you like. Say, send us some drawings, suggestions, things that can be added to this festival. And then if you happen to hit a lucky streak, maybe you'd find that festival building as a virtual festival, which then when it goes back onto the streets, perhaps it would be projected, you know, on large buildings and create an extra dimension, a depth to the festival.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's important that you take it somewhere that you're wanting to.
So you're going to go on to your next talk?
Yes, no, we are. Thank you so much, Kenny.
Okay.
It's been an absolute
I can always listen in.
pleasure. Yes, no, that sounds really good.
Okay.
Thank you so much again for being a part of this. It was extremely
great stuff. Thanks a lot.
Yes.
Cheers.
So our next speakers for tonight will be Jessica Espresso and Peter Bezley. Jess Espresso, she studied her Masters of Architecture at University of Queensland. She's worked internationally for architects including Junya Isagami, Kengo Kuma, and Kundu. Her office, Espresso, is an architecture studio and art practice that engages with built and speculative architectural work, of which she has exhibited in both Brisbane and Sydney. Peter, also a graduate from UQ, a little bit earlier, but he is an architect currently residing in Brisbane, has practiced by the name of Peter Bezley that works both out of London and Brisbane. His work is most well known, I would assume, for a previous firm that he had co-founded named Assemblage, which was the Iraqi parliament that he'd won in 2013. Peter has taught at both the Bartlett School and is currently teaching at the University of Queensland. Together, Peter and Jess will be presenting a variety of their recent collaborations. So yeah, I'll hand you over to both of them.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Can you hear us all right there, Hudson?
Yeah, I've got you loud and clear.
Can I just say how nice it was to see Canny there? It was a couple of years ago now. I didn't know that you were talking tonight, Canny. I guess it's your morning. And I remember, I think it was a Peshakusha type situation over in Paddington Basin. I think that's where we met, and you were giving a talk, and I gave a talk at the same time. But anyway, it's good to see you.
I remember, no, it's great.
Yeah, and we were,
global.
and we were sort of milling around afterwards, and everyone was sort of having a pint, and it's almost like with a certain Vaseline on the lens, sort of, you know, when these sorts of things were possible. But anyway, it was nice at the time. How long have we got, Hudson? How long?
I probably let that one go for a little bit too long, but okay. No, look, yeah, just see where you go.
We'll try and go for, say, half an hour, shall we? Yeah.
Yeah,
so
that sounds awesome.
Collapse in complete order. So,
no, thank you so much for being involved.
It would be really great, of course, to take as many questions as possible. So we've got two projects to show. The first was a project that we did. It was a competition entry that we didn't win. And it was one of those competitions that you enter in and you're all hyped up about at the time, and you're full of belief in your project. And the results come out. Not only did you not win or place at all, that the people, you know, the schemes that did win, we didn't like, and we thought, well, why did we do that? And then actually looking at the work itself, it was actually just great to have done it, and it was very interesting for us. And we're not actually 100% happy with the scheme, but we think it's interesting, and there are lots of bits that we enjoyed about it. So that was a chapel in Rukomo, in Rwanda. And then I thought, given that given the design exercise that you're about to do, I'd show an earlier work competition, again, entry that I did in Baghdad in the 2008, in response to it, where many people had died in 2005, and it was the sort of strategic what to do with this part of the city, but it also drilled down into some architectural proposals as well. So I thought it would be interesting just to show the two scales as well. So we'll probably start with Rukomo.
Yeah, we'll share our screen.
All right. So we'll just switch over. And here we go. So Jess is going to show Rukomo, and then I'll talk to the Baghdad one.
So these are the two headings, I suppose. Hang on, I'll just put it on full screen.
Yeah. How's that?
Is that good? Can everyone see?
Yeah, we're on now.
Okay, great.
I apologize to people who have seen this one before. There are a couple of familiar names and faces in the group, but hopefully you'll, learn something that you didn't know before. So this is a chapter in just a little way out from a tiny little town called Rukomo, and this image is probably one of the first ones that we really came up with, and it really stuck, and there's something sort of quite
enigmatic about it, I suppose, or there was for us anyway. It's what you can see here is a sort of a radio mast that was an addition to the brief, and we named it the calling tower, and it's sort of meant to perform two functions. One is a radio mast, and the other is a sort of, I guess, a sort of beacon's probably not the right word, but something that the approaching pilgrim can use as a sort of wayfinding tool to the site. And
because it was a pilgrimage church, and so we just thought that it has a very beautiful little clearing on the top, but we thought it would be very sort of moving in a way to get a little glimpse from afar, but then also to use that as a way of telegraphing actual services to the surrounding mountainous countryside.
So this is Rwanda as a country, very simple. But the site is a black dot there, and it's, as you can see, many people might know, this is sort of a small landlocked country. It's one of the most densely populated countries in Africa, and it's also probably one of the poorest, but it's an incredibly beautiful place. It's geographically very diverse. It's got, incredible mountain ranges, plains, bustling capital city. So we just started with some mapping exercises, roads, and started looking into possible building materials that we might start to think about using just as a sort of way into the project. So these are sort of clay and peat deposits for building with earth, and sand deposits around the place, different types of stone depositories, and we got quite into looking at sort of granite as one of the primary building materials. Rwanda produces some incredibly beautiful granite. We got right into it. I'm still getting phone calls from Rwanda sometimes about granite. And zooming in.
The budget had to be very, very low.
Yeah.
And we were using local labour, which made sense in any case. So looking at these materials was both a sort of fantastic education for us, but also a necessity of the brief as well.
Yeah, so zooming in, here's our site with the red dot, and Uganda's not far away. The site is sort of situated along this sort of fairly arterial road with Kigali, the capital city, down towards the south, and lots of these little sort of townships scattered around the place that sort of branch out off that sort of main road. But where we are it's still quite remote, despite the fact that there are some little towns around. One thing we sort of started mapping as well were different kind of religious places in the area. There are some mosques, as you can see, but also many sort of denominations of Christianity. One thing we sort of found really interesting was that during the Rwandan genocide in the 90s, I think it was 94, prior to that, the dominant religious denomination was Catholicism, and then during and after the genocide, all these sort of other denominations came in to help, and also there was a bit of a loss of faith with the Catholics, I think. There was, I don't know what happened, something, I think there was a betrayal of some kind amongst a certain group, and so from then on, all these sort of other denominations started to sort of come up in the area, but also I think religion in the area is very important to people. A lot of people are religious. It's a real kind of communal sort of thing. And I think one thing that we sort of realized was that there are so many, there are just hundreds of these sort of religious places in the capital city, but only a few scattered around the sort of more rural areas, even though they're also quite densely populated. So that was a sort of trigger for us to come up with this idea of a sort of the radio tower, and to be able to broadcast religious messages and sermons and things to people who couldn't access a sort of a place of worship. So here it is with the sort of site surroundings. So the white is mountainous, so very, very high mountains, and the green are sort of flat plains. So we're sort of in the middle, although it's quite mountainous. The site's on a sort of a clearing on top of a mountain, so it is still quite mountainous, but you can see sort of from this map how diverse the area is that we're in. And just some quick images of the area. It's incredibly beautiful. It's very rich soil, lots grows there. It's a very poor area, but incredibly beautiful. It's sort of like the dream project brief in a way for us. And here's the site itself. Probably should have mentioned before that the client is a group of Clare nuns, they're called, and they live in this existing cloister, which is the black that you see on that image. And the idea is that they are hoping to have a chapel that they can use for sermons and things within that site somewhere. So that was also littered with these incredible conifers everywhere, and it's kind of a dream in a way. So here are some early sketches we did, just of that same sort of cooling tower, just conceptualizing what that might feel like upon approach, and then coming closer and starting to approach the site. Just some, these aren't very nice sketches, but they kind of get the idea across. We sort of started to think about how you might cluster these things together to sort of form a sort of slightly tighter clearing rather than placing them very far away from one another in the site. So the sort of square to the bottom is the existing cloister where the nuns live, and the cooling towers is sort of northwest, and the chapel's sort of northeast, and then the sort of entry to the site is by that sort of wiggling path you see. And so, sorry, the image is blurry, but it's this sort of idea of this sort of pilgrimage sort of approach where you approach by this sort of winding path, and there are sort of conifers everywhere, and you see the chapel at first on a slight angle, and you sort of therefore read it as a sort of an object or its own kind of, I don't know, it sort of reads differently to a sort of elevation, I suppose, and you get a view of the cooling tower in the background as well. There are a few projects we were discussing at the time that have adopted this kind of method. I think Ronchamp and the Parthenon.
Yeah, I guess there's an older tradition of approaching places of worship on hills where they don't present a facadal view. They present a kind of almost scenographic approach of the building in three-quarter view. And as Jess was saying in that last sketch, that earlier sketch, we were just, this one, very keen that the heart of the project was in fact the space between the three objects. So that dot on the top left is the cooling tower, the one on the right there is the chapel, and the existing cloister to the south. But between the three of them, by placing them in that way, it fuels the space with a lot of authority. And then coming into that, this squiggly line is something that you approach and you discover through the woods.
So yeah, just this is sort of us sort of starting to test things like thresholds and building materials. The idea of this, using these sort of flayed conifer trunks to support the chapel roof, and then that kind of being encapsulated by this sort of lower rammed earth wall, which would sort of enclose the space, but you have this very kind of open view through it to the trees, which you can sort of see here, and also in this internal view. So we started we started talking about what is this chapel for and what is it saying, and we sort of started to think about this idea of Christ in nature and Christ in the world, and this internal view starts to look at that. So you're actually looking sort of beyond the presbytery into nature, seeing these sort of conifers beyond. You see some sky and the roof sort of raising up, and there's this quite sort of high thing. And so it becomes less about the kind of sermon and this sort of internal kind of experience. It's all about the sort of nature that's surrounding the space. And just looking at roof forms, how that might work. and how it might sort of start to raise up as towards the presbytery. So start to get a kind of clearer view of the surroundings as you look towards the priest.
I mean, it's not sort of the 20-second anecdote. There's a Finnish friend of mine called Olof, and we went on a bit of an alto road trip in Finland. And at one point we came across it was in Helsinki in this case, there was this a chapel, and I don't know who designed it. It wasn't particularly attractive or anything, but it was pretty brilliant in the way that it had the congregation facing what appeared to be a kind of missing wall to the end of the church, and the cross was stationed in a mound in a garden some way out from the building, such that that formed that elevation, or that internal elevation of the building. And the message, I think, was that the practice of the church and almost the atmosphere or this of the congregation wasn't just an enclosed box-like affair, and it was placing the almost theological message of Christ being out in the world, in nature, amongst us, in everything. And we were very sort of taken with this project, in the idea that you wouldn't be sealed off from nature, that you could see it through, and that the building was in a way an abstracting series of things that we found in nature anyway, and that the cooling tower would be visible. So there was this interaction, and we couldn't afford high performance glass, or almost any glass. We couldn't afford all these things anyway, so it was a great excuse for us to erode and omit things from the building that we didn't really want anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of back and forth about, congregating and and thresholds and things, but I feel like we kind of got to a good place in the end. This is one of our sort of final panels with a couple of kind of site diagrams, plan and kind of long section. You can see how sort of vertical that radio tower is and how horizontal the chapel is. It's this sort of, nice sort of contrast, I think, and how kind of winding that sort of path is, and then it does sort of lead to this sort of congregational area. And here it is, as you imagine, it's sort of like a full congregation. So the chapel itself allows 100 people inside, but this we're sort of imagining that it could also work for sort of like huge crowds as well. So an internal view, so you sort of really get that view of those sort of tree trunks, and you get this sort of slice of them along the sides as well, which we thought was nice against the sort of flayed trunks, which act as columns. And just quickly, you've seen this sort of diagram before, but we thought there was a sort of nice synchrony as well between these sort of like western kind of view of mountains and eastern view of plains, and this sort of western kind of axis towards the parvis or the congregational area, and then eastern view of the presbyteries. And I mean, we kept some of these drawings quite sort of clean, a little bit boring, but I think we sort of wanted the presentation to read more like a publication that you might find in Detail magazine or something, so that it was super clean and really clear. It's very easy to understand as a building, and easy to read, and just nice to read as well.
So just in terms of the elements, there's a round earth wall which is low level that forms the enclosure, but it's the flayed trunks that hold this sort of boat-like roof up, and the roof morphs as it goes along and forms sort of a flatter area to the courtyard, which is more embracing, and then it gathers itself up to a peak where the cross is.
Yeah, just looking at sort of construction techniques, I'll run through this quite quickly, but construction axonometric, and then a sort of more detailed axonometric. And we really did try to take the project quite seriously, in that we didn't want to propose anything that couldn't be built in the area. So we looked into kind of really everything down to the last detail. And then the competition, we sort of finished, and then we thought, sometimes you finish things and submit them, and you tend to feel like you haven't quite finished yourself yet with it. So amazingly, we actually built this model after we submitted for the competition.
Yeah, it was a bit of a lesson actually, because we felt compelled to do a render, and we ended up not liking any of them. So we weren't prepared to sort of give up on it. So we made this little model and started photographing it, and wished that we'd just photograph the model and use that instead.
Definitely.
It was sort of rawer and better, and so.
Yeah, and this was a nice precedent because we've started, I guess, making models for every project that each of us will do or that we both do together, and it's such a great way to explore a form and a building, and you get as a thing like nothing else, and you sort of read it in a different way, and it can be quite experiential as well, I think.
Okay.
So that's the last slide. This is sort of some photographs we took of the model, and it was really fun to play with that. I think this sort of
and it's a lot closer to what we intended. I think was that it was a little bit raw, but then that cross-laminated ply roof ends up being like the shin of some giant or something bigger than a person, but nevertheless formed as if it's not extruded, and then the earth rises up into the shape it needs to, and then the columns span between the two. So it was interesting.
Yeah. Should we move on to?
Was that the last one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this is well, we thought we'd talk about this one because it was it's completely different scale. It does involve trauma and loss, and what to do strategically, both at a large scale and potentially at an architectural scale. I guess we're all familiar with the trials and tribulations of Baghdad. In this particular case, I was working and leading a series of projects in Baghdad from 2008 through to about 2013. This particular one came from a tragedy in the north of the city, and it was about an area called Kadmia. And in the north there's Baghdad, there's the Tigris. The centre of town is sort of there. The university district is down here. And the area up here, this neighbourhood called Kadmia, was actually its own place before Baghdad expanded. But it contains a very important Shia shrine, and although Kadmia as an area has about 1 to 1.5 million people in it, the area around the shrine itself, in particular the Medina, which are these tiny streets and this extraordinary mud brick area, is only about 1 kilometre square, and each year 1 million pilgrims descend on the place, and it really struggles to cope. In this case, in 2005, there was a bomb scare, and 1,000 people died in a stampede, many of whom were vulnerable people, like children and older people, and many women fell into the river, and because they're not allowed to reveal themselves, they then can't swim and went died, and it was a horrific scene. And the authorities ran a competition a few years later to do a master plan for the scheme, and they were quite open-minded about how it might be approached to deal with the number of pilgrims approaching the shrine. But it was also an opportunity to help the Kadmiri themselves with their city in the meantime, in not just for the occasion of the pilgrimage, but also to make life bearable in Kadmir in general. And when you go there, it's extraordinary because it has the Medinas of Iraq have this extraordinary quality about them, but you also realize how fierce and difficult the conditions are there. What you can see there is that's the shrine itself, but with the compound around it, and then the city sort of hustling up and pressing itself upon the boundary walls there. In the old days, it wasn't like that. The shrine actually came first, and the town came after and sort of grew around it like a barnacle. And with lack of investment and so many other things, this is sort of what it's like from above, which makes it look completely uninhabitable, but it's not. Inside there's a lot of people living. The basic utilities are basically not working at all. things like sewage, potable water, and so on, and also just relief from the heat. And there you can see this is zoomed in on the Medina itself. Inside there is this extraordinary tentacular web of streets. There's a lot to be said about the Medinas themselves, but you can see there's a slight clearing around the outside edge of the shrine. That happened in the 70s. There was, I think, a Polish contractor got in and started clearing things, I think, before the UN came in and stopped them. So it was just sort of left like this. And on the left there, on the far left, was a previously demolished area of the city. And so we were actually given a large accommodation schedule to meet for this. And it included a large new mosque in itself, a theological library with 50,000 volumes, a theological college where scholars would come from all over the Arab world and stay there. And we were asked to approach the area with fairly open mind about how to improve things like movement and the economics of the area as well, because there was a serious problem with the different districts of Baghdad maintaining themselves, and the Kadmiri at that point, they didn't have any access to mass transport, they didn't have access to a lot of the economic engines that were keeping various parts of the city going. So to step you through on these, we mapped a lot of the important historic buildings in the Medina. The Medina itself is extraordinary, needs to be preserved and nourished, but there were also a lot of important buildings embedded in the Medina. And in so many ways, the Arab cities are like this, is you can't really see them from the street. You have to go into the courtyards, and then you see the specialness, because it's reserved for family and it's reserved for friends. It's not on show like the front facade of a European building. And then this is just a reversed out Nolly plan showing the extraordinary intensity of the built fabric versus the voids. And you can see that it's almost like a single building in many parts, with a confetti of small courtyards scattered through it. And when you zoom in there, you start to see how that works. A lot of those will be single-family households, but they're often multi-generational. And the house itself, the Baghdadi House, is a fascinating, almost lecture in itself of the way that the daily life of the family, whether it's sort of dinner times or waking up or sleeping or lunches and so on, happen on different levels of the house, but also in different corners. So they tend not to have a specific use for each room. They use it depending on how hot it is and who's there. So here's a cross-section through the house. One particular aspect of the house that really fascinated me is that the primary part is the courtyard, and it often has a pure geometry of a square or a rectangle. And I've just shown with the dotted line there the street coming past, and what you'll find when you're walking down the street is that they have these fantastic rooms with these cantilevering chaniciel little window seats, and those window seat geometries reflect the geometry not of the street but of the courtyard inside. So what you see as you're wandering through the Medina is actually the geometry from the inside of the building, and it's a really fascinating, I think, overlay of the two things. And it reinforces once again, it's the interiority of the house, not the public realm, that's important. And you'll see how we sort of drew on that after. So here it is, it's in its sort of reduced state. It's pretty extraordinary, almost anthill of houses and window seats. All of those cables are flying to local generators because the main power isn't working. And then sometimes they get very tall. So you get these extremely narrow cross-sections of public space. And there's also a sort of fascinating thing that happens where the men who see themselves as sort of in charge of business quite often talking in the courtyards, but the women are often overhearing all of this, and then they tell each other the news at the higher level through the overhanging window seats, and then the news travels across the city much faster, and by the time the other men get home, all the other households already know what's going on long before they're able to sort of tell the news. But it's so anyway, we used this idea of the geometry to help us in the master plan and the urban design and the intervention for introducing a lot of the services and the buildings that would help the community. So on the left here in diagram form, you can see this is the ragged edge led by those destructive Polish contractors. And what we wanted to do was to create a regular shape, because in this, taking the lessons from the Baghdadi House is that there will be a purer geometry on the inside of the building, and then it's actually the outside which becomes scribed to the urban realm as it has to. So what you can see on the right there is a building. It's a linear building that thickens when it needs to and thins down to form portals and other administrative services, but it scribes to the city and then forms a pure geometry where all of the new processes of the shrine can happen in good space in that main courtyard. And you can see how this will take place. So that's an older slide just showing the way it was before the destruction in the 70s, where you actually have the Medina pressing up hard, almost like a sort of compressed gas against the shrine edge. And I'll return to that scribing later, but this was also, we also did a plan for the region, for the wider neighbourhood, and that circle on the left is a new train station, which was placed along the existing train line, and all of those white squares is a new industrial and manufacturing quarter, which we introduced in order to create employment in the area. And this was the elements of the final scheme, and will make quite a bit more sense when we put it in context. And the green line on the left was a large boulevard of trees and landscape. And the reason for that was to take the 1 million pilgrims. It's a fairly astonishing thing to take 1 million pilgrims and push them through the tiny cracks of that Medina, and you can see why the terrible things happen that they do. So part of the idea of this boulevard was to give a direct route from the train station. And by the way, now that they would have a train station, you don't have 1 million people arriving in little vans and cars and so on. So they can still arrive by foot as they need to, but they can arrive from the station. And that boulevard can act as a mustering ground, as a way of controlling the crowds and keeping everybody safe. It can then feed actually through in this new quarter. If you cast your mind back to the plan earlier, there was this sort of kite-shaped plan of previously destroyed terrain, which allowed us to place almost all of the new large-scale accommodation that we needed to insert, including a dining room for 10,000 people. And that would then lead through to the wall building, which is in light pink there, and the darker pink areas are the portals, which take you through to the main movement routes of the city. And then wrapping around all of that in a line is a necklace, is a new route. And we did two things with that. It was to create local centres, nodal points, which would provide services to the pilgrims without everyone crushing into the centre. So it was partly a crowd control measure, but it was much more than that, because we were able to put a new ring main under all of the streets just in that area. We knew we couldn't afford to give all of the households sewage and water, but if we ran them to the nodes, we knew that we could then, as money became available, run them to every household. It also became a route in itself, so that some of the nodes offered some things, other ones offered others, and you were able to actually service all of those without having to again go to the centre and put more and more. So this is what it looked like in the city, and you can see there the scribing to the outside was very much about fitting as best possibly could to the existing Medina fabric, not disturbing a single, I think it was one house, one of the protected houses, but it was a very small number that we needed to disturb in the end. And then in the nodal points, we had a strategy where there would be some new buildings, but there would also be converted existing buildings, and then occasionally there would be new spaces that we'd carve from existing voids. So there's just a little zoom in the model, and we're sort of trying to use the laser cutter to give that Medina effect, that sort of almost burnt effect of the city fabric and the city grain, and then the white lacery is the new route. And so white was new buildings, the brown were converted existing buildings, and then the deeper red is the heritage buildings. It's the diagram of the necklace. And this is just showing the radiating services from the new nodes. And this alone, just the provision of services in a marshalled and a strategic way would probably have done more to transform the lives of the Kadmiri than anything else. This is just a little sketch showing perhaps the character of those small local nodes, and we thought that they would become little centres in their own right over time. So a shot of some of the new provision. We actually lifted things up slightly so that you get an enormous amount of freedom to the service access below. Some large mosque to the south, just down here. This is almost like kind of a development, I guess. We were very interested in the Aspland Library and the way that light was brought in from the top, and then the Theological College to the right there. To show what that looks like in a diagram form. So here's the light coming through the roof from above, those tiered seating. So it's almost like the British Library or the Aspland Library, where you go into this enormous room of books and volumes, and it's really the books themselves that give you the sense of architecture and sense of space, and everything else is about light. You can see the little dots there as the upper level, which becomes the elevated ground plane. Over to the right here is the enormous 10,000 seat dining hall where the pilgrims would be fed. And of course that needed to be a ground level so that everybody can move freely out on 3 elevations. And then on the right hand side here is the Theological College, which I was imagining more as again a bit like an anthill, where instead of having the pure geometries of the library, it was sort of volume stacked on volume stacked on volume, and scholars would be living there, and it would feel like a village in some way. And then all of that was wrapped in a screen. So you'd have these disparate volumes which would be given a unity, and there would be a distance between that screen and the buildings such that you knew that you were going into a compound, and it had its own quality. It was like a world within a world. That's just showing the scribing between the historic buildings and the wall building. There was also, this is almost like I actually presented this in Baghdad to the mayor about how it could be built. So we would go in there, and you need to build your way out of the site. So you would go in there and do this selective cleaning and editing and enabling works in this phase to create the wall building. And that contains all of the new administration and this new space, which is the Sahan, which they required to do all of the processes and all of the servicing of the pilgrims coming to and from the shrine, which is an enormous logistical effort in itself. And then the necklace and the utilities would come in, and then you put in the large new buildings and the boulevard, and you're building your way out of the site, and then you get to the main master plan there. Just closing on this image, I absolutely love this image. And it's very like being there, where the sun is so intensely hot that when people sit on the ground like that, they just appear like little geological blobs. And the shade that's cast from the shrine there with those overhangs, and they're often some of those columns are actually timber, enormous trees, I think, from Lebanon. And then what you can see in the niche there's a Baghdadi tradition of cut mirrored sconces and niche ornaments. So they're all hanging down in these little stalactite formations. incredibly beautiful. And then you can imagine when the reflected light catches them in the shadow, it gives this very ethereal quality, and you don't know where the form starts and stops. And it's fantastic. And as a system of ornament, I think it's brilliant. And of course, gives you an enormous sense of specialness in entering the building. And it was in its own way a really interesting, for me, balance between architecture about light, but on the other hand, there's form there as well, and sequence and ornament. So it was a really fascinating balance of those three things. That was it from us. Hudson.
Thank you so much. That was always extremely captivating. It really was. I think we'll open it up for questions, if that's all right by both of you.
Yeah, of course.
I'm not sure how quickly everyone will respond. I'd like to enjoy a bit of awkward silence. I think one thing before that might kick things off is within both of the projects, there's a very, very strong mapping, a degree of mapping that goes into them. And I guess more of a question, what role do you feel that mapping plays, whether it be with the chapel or whether it be with the proposal of the nodes, that you were talking to Baghdadi?
I'm always just to have our own view on this, but I'm actually in two minds about it. It has its own problems because it's a little bit like empiricism in philosophy, where if you just go out there and map away, thinking that you're capturing all of the main points of the site, the thing about empiricism, though, is that you tend to answer the question that you've already had in mind in the first place. So if you're mapping water or if you're mapping this. So I think it's illusory to do a conventional set of maps, analysis maps for site, if it's architecture, or a city, if it's not, if it's urban design, and think that you've sort of captured the whole place. So in work that I do now, and do with Jess, and also in terms of teaching, is that I'm a big fan now of people's personal histories, what they're bringing to the place. I think it needs to tend to be sort of combination of that. They need to take, I guess, there are other histories and theories to take account of. There's quite apart from that site, there's sort of history and theory of architecture and the history of that place. And often those histories have a quite strange and weird and anecdotal sense, along with those factual, more canonical approaches, like this happened in that year and that happened. So I still think the mapping is useful because quite often it throws up things that you didn't know about. So it's an education process. But I think you've got to sort of watch yourself and not think that you've sort of captured the place in its entirety, because you never will for a start, and it will be missing all that interesting fine grain. But
I think it's also important to come at it with a really sort of open mind. So, and then you sort of might discover things which might change the way you're looking at the project from the beginning. So an example is with the Rakomo project, we, mapping out the denominations and where all those religious sort of facilities were, we then realized that something like a radio system or some sort of low cost way of broadcasting these things might be required, and then that became an addition to the brief. So it can sort of help you to unpick the brief and add to it if you need to. I think it doesn't have to be this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. It often is, but yeah.
It's a great fallacy, I think, to think that the project needs to grow out of the site. And so at university you often sort of thought, well, if you just keep squeezing the site like a lemon, and the pips of the project will sort of spit out. And it's just not true. It might do that, but it might. I mean, we can all. It's not difficult to imagine a really fantastic and profound project that brings something to the site of a place that just never existed before, but transforms it utterly in a really interesting, positive way. So the project can come from anywhere. It can come from all sorts of places, and the site analysis should inform that, but it won't determine it.
Yeah, really interesting answer. I really do like that. Questions? Surely we're going to have someone.
Hey, I have a question.
There's a head in the background. Is the head also?
Yes.
It's Abby.
Oh, I see.
No, I think it's.
Oh no,
we're a team. Okay. Yeah, we're a whole team.
There'd be a big eye in your team, mate.
Yeah, put one on. Watch out. My question follows on from that. In the mapping, like, how do you find these resources to that level of detail that you want, and to the degree of this idea of place and people and characters, which I know, like from my experience, it's more of a data thing, but especially places that you can't go to or you know been before. How do you sort of find that human element in those things?
You'll never have all the data anyway. So let's say you had a lot of data on a place. Does that mean that you've captured the place? Because even if you went there and walked over, that'll be a different experience and a different form of knowledge to someone who has lived there and grown up there. And even other things, it'll seem different to a 12-year-old girl to a sort of 8-year-old man from Nigeria. So all these things come into play about the knowledge of a place. So there will always be this scale going from sort of zero to a fabled full knowledge, that you're going to be somewhere on that in any case.
Yeah, and I think just kind of aside from that, just reading a lot and reading things that you wouldn't necessarily, think of as something obvious that might inform you, like trying to find maps online and things like for recruitment. I was reading through sort of like construction reports that I would find online about available materials, and they were so boring, but it really did help to inform what was sort of available in the area. And you can, but you'll never find everything.
So I guess you do need to get a sort of baseline conventional stuff if you can. If you can't, then just make it up, and you'll need to be upfront about that. Is that you make assumptions, and it's about having a series of fixes, but not all fixes. And then, as Jesse says, I think that other things might come from mad little trade papers or some local poet or something, some much more kind of incidental or fragmentary thing that might give you an interesting insight into that world. Some movie that came out in the 50s or God knows what. But it could be, you need to, I think the best projects in my view come out of that interesting combination of the two. And if you're lucky enough to be in the team, often the conversations that you'll have with your team member will sort of bring out the fruitiness of it.
Yeah, cool. Sweet. Thank you.
No, that's very good. Does anyone else have another question?
Yes, I have one, if that's all right.
Yes.
I just have, I'll try my best to articulate it the way I want it to, but both of your projects that you've talked about today have both been religious, obviously, primarily. How do you work within a subject matter that is so sensitive? In our brief, it potentially leads to talking about movements that have happened this year, such as Black Lives Matter. In cases where where you're designing for something where you're primordially like an ally or a spectator that hasn't had necessarily hands-on experience in an issue, how brave can you be with your design without it being, before it becomes potentially insensitive to the people that you're designing for?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's a what's the word? It's a kind of I guess a crisis of the designer you have in any case, because even without being in a contested situation or a contested issue situation, when you think about it, all our work as urban designers and architects it is occupying that kind of role in some way anyway. You know, that it's taking resources. It's part of the development juggernaut. It's also consuming things. It's displacing people. It's enriching some people and not others. We're actually part of this, the whole thing. So to take just to zero in for a moment on your Black Lives Matter one, that's a really fascinating one. If you get a chance, there's an interesting series of podcasts put out by the New York Times, and they've been covering the Black Lives Matter thing on an almost daily basis. And a lot of it, though, rather than being sort of news reporting, it delves into a lot of background stories and interviews. And one thing that comes out really strongly is how surprised and how moved so many Black people have been, that so many of the rallies are filled with white people chanting Black Lives Matter. And it really matters that, Black Lives Matter and white lives that support Black Lives Matter. So if you're another white life supporting Black lives, then that's a contribution. That's a stance. That doesn't mean that you're pretending to be a Black person, but that doesn't mean you sit around and do nothing either. So I think you can intervene with all legitimacy.
And also just being in communication with lots of people and just researching, reading a lot, hearing other people's stories, just trying to, understand as much as possible, I think, is the only thing you really can do. Research as much as possible. Just, it's not a sort of hand of God situation necessarily. It doesn't have to be.
It's a hard one though, because a lot of the agency for coloured people should be by coloured people, understandably, and so that should come first. But we have a role, I think, as well as me, meaning people who are not people of colour. So there's, I think that's how to approach it. But I'd say that the first point I was trying to make is still valid, is that these are ones, that particular one is a recent thing that's come up. It's not a recent phenomenon, obviously, but there are many, many other ones to do with the environment, to do with gender equity and social mobility. There's a lot of things that we are inevitably engaged with as architects.
That's a good point.
Brilliant, thank you so much.
So you can't get away from it, Alexander. You're stuck. You're mired.
Unfortunately, so.
In the evil cobweb of issues. No, it's probably for the best, because it's also how fantastic projects can also happen. And I mean, in a way, it's the world, isn't it? And you can't turn from it. You have to work with it.
Not just architects.
Yeah, exactly.
Most certainly. Well, thank you for unpacking that for me. Helps a lot.
Sorry for people that can't hear very well. I'm just reading the comments. Hopefully it's okay.
Yeah, it's clear, but not down there.
Anyone else in for any questions?
Yeah. Is our microphone not good, or is it me mumbling?
No. It's pretty clear on my end. I think it's
both mumble, but
yeah, I'm a professional mumble hearer though. So
what was that, Hudson? Sorry.
I'm good at hearing people that mumble.
Did anybody else have any queries? When's it due?
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's presentations are on Saturday. This year it's been extended out. It's normally, I think, a 2-day turnaround for SuperStudio, but because of everything that's going on, we decided to try something different and extend it out for the week. We've got a series of lectures coming up on Wednesday. At the moment, it's looking to be Moro Barako from Barako Right, and also Ayano Toki from Japan. That'll be very interesting, I think.
I know Ayano. I had dinner with her in Japan once.
Yeah, so I'm sure you would. So she'll be talking about disasters within Japan, which I think will be extremely interesting and kind of vulnerable place. And Barako Wright will be talking about vulnerable areas. Again, working down in Korea. So.
The only piece of advice that I can think to give, if it's useful, is that in order to help other people, particularly large groups of people, it may not mean doing everything down to the last sort of doorknob and there. Is that it could be that you create what I'd call a platform, and by platform I don't mean an actual platform, but an approach, a thing, a platform on which those other people can then come. It's an enabling thing, can then operate their lives and become the heroes. You know, you're almost like making the stage, and then they're the actors. You're not the actor. And then, if you can fashion your project that you're forming this excellent, really well-designed, profound platform on which all these other actors can come, then you've maybe done a more profound thing than a really good-looking object. Or, I mean, it will have object qualities, of course. And I'm actually not one of those people who feels that objects, you know, there's a form versus space type of thing. I think forms are very important. They, you know, as much as anything else, they're great for navigation, but they're also for, you know, they're memorable. You know, the object is the thing that refuses to go away. But I think that it's if you can not get bamboozled into the idea that you have to design the lives, the project and the lives and every last piece of the thing that goes towards it, all you really need to do is unpick a way of giving a quantum leap up in that situation. So it's a platform, it's not the thing, it's not their life, as it were.
Yeah, I think that is particularly relevant. It's present, I think, both in what you both have presented and Kenny, that you're not looking to design what is in between the walls. It's of this kind of approach that'll have greater effect long term.
Yeah.
That is ultimately what the brief is trying to get each and every participant to at least consider. So yeah, no, but I think on that note, thank you both so much for presenting. It's been a very interesting and
yeah, great.
Interesting experience.
It was really enjoyable, and good luck, everyone. Thanks, Hudson.
Thank you both.
I hope there's a way of seeing the schemes. That'd be really
Yes,
interesting.
we will definitely be in contact about bringing you both back in. Yeah, to also hear your voices on the role of the jurors or something at the end. Really exciting.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
But yes, no, thank you to you both, and thank you to Kenny. Yes.
Fabulous. Good luck, everyone.